There's one interview question that's ended more developer interviews than almost any algorithm problem. Can you explain the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming? And here's the surprising part. Most people can answer it. Encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism. They've memorized the definitions. They recite them confidently. The interviewer nods along. Then comes the follow-up question. Can you give me a real-world scenario where inheritance is actually the wrong choice? And suddenly, the room goes quiet. Because a lot of developers learn these concepts as a checklist, 4 terms, 4 definitions, something to memorize for interviews. But that's not what they're really about. These principles are engineering decisions. Each one exists to solve a specific problem. Each one comes with trade-offs. And if you apply them blindly, they can make your code worse instead of better. The difference between a developer who memorized the 4 pillars and one who truly understands them isn't whether they can define them, it's whether they know when to use them and when not to. In this video, we're going beyond the textbook definitions. We'll look at why each concept exists, the problems it prevents, the mistakes developers commonly make, and the situations where the correct solution is actually the wrong one. By the end, you won't just know the 4 pillars, you'll understand the thinking behind them. So let's start from the beginning. Before we can understand the 4 pillars, we need to understand the foundation they're built on. Think about the real world for a second. Everything around us has 2 things. It has data that describes it, and it has actions it can perform. Take your phone. It has a brand, a battery percentage, a screen size. That's its data. And it can make calls, send messages, play music, and take photos. That's its behavior. The important part is that those things belong together. Your phone doesn't store its data in one place and keep its abilities somewhere else. Everything is packaged into a single thing. That's exactly the idea behind an object. An object is simply a bundle of data and the code that works on that data. Instead of separating information from behavior, we keep them together as one unit. But creating every object from scratch would be repetitive, so we create a blueprint. In object-oriented programming, that blueprint is called a class. A class defines what data an object should have and what actions it should be able to perform. Once the blueprint exists, creating objects becomes easy. Think of a class as the floor plan of a house. The floor plan defines the structure. The actual houses built from it are the objects. They share the same design, but each one can contain different values inside. Now, when you create one of these objects, something special happens. A constructor runs. You can think of it as the object's first moment of life. Its job is simple. Make sure the object starts in a valid state. Without a constructor, you could end up with half-initialized objects floating around your system, waiting for someone to remember to fill in the missing data. Constructors remove that uncertainty. They make sure every object is born ready to use. And every object, no matter how simple or complex, has 3 fundamental characteristics. State, the data it currently holds. Behavior, the things it can do. And identity, what makes it unique. That last one is easy to overlook. 2 bank accounts might have the same owner's name and exactly the same balance, but they're still different accounts. The system needs a way to tell them apart. That's identity. And once you understand objects, classes, and identity, you're finally ready to understand why the 4 pillars exist in the first place. Let's start with the first pillar, and probably the most misunderstood one. Here's what encapsulation is not. It's not making a variable private and then exposing it through getters and setters. If you have a private balance, but anyone can still read it and change it through methods that do nothing except return or update the value, then you haven't really hidden anything. You've just added an extra step. So what is encapsulation actually? It's about keeping data together with the rules that govern that data and controlling how the outside world can interact with it. Think about a bank account. A bad approach is to grab the balance, do the math yourself, and then write the new balance back. A better approach is to simply tell the account what you want to do. For example, withdraw some money. The account takes care of everything else. It checks whether the amount is valid. It checks whether the account is frozen. It records the transaction, and only then does it update the balance. All of that logic lives inside the object where it belongs. This idea is often called tell, don't ask. Don't pull data out of an object and make decisions somewhere else. Tell the object what you want done and let it handle the details. That gives you two major benefits. First, protection. Nobody can accidentally put the account into an invalid state because they never get direct access to its internals. Second, flexibility. You can completely change how balances are stored behind the scenes, and as long as withdrawing money still works the same way, the rest of the system doesn't care. And that's where access modifiers come in. Public means anyone can use it. Private means only the object itself can access it. Protected means the object and its child classes can access it. Think of them as the guardrails that help enforce encapsulation. Encapsulation protects data. Abstraction manages complexity. Think about driving a car. Every day, you interact with a steering wheel, a gas pedal, and a brake pedal. What you don't think about is everything happening underneath. The fuel injection system, the engine control unit, the throttle body, hundreds of moving parts working together. And that's the point. The car gives you a simple interface and hides the complexity behind it. Software works the same way. Imagine you want to send an email. You provide a recipient, a subject, and a message. The email gets delivered. You don't worry about SMTP connections, DNS lookups, TLS handshakes, MIME encoding, or retry logic. All of that complexity is hidden behind a simple interface. That's abstraction. But this is where a lot of developers get into trouble. Because abstraction is powerful, it's tempting to keep adding more of it. And eventually, you end up with so many layers that a simple button click sends you through 8 different files before you can figure out what's happening. At that point, you're not reducing complexity anymore, you're hiding it. That's not abstraction, that's obfuscation. So here's the rule. Every abstraction should make something genuinely easier to use or understand. If it doesn't, it probably shouldn't exist. Now let's move on to the third pillar, inheritance. Imagine you're building an e-commerce system. You start with a product class. It has a name, a price, and some logic for calculating tax. Everything looks good. Then the requirements change. Now you need books, which are tax exempt. You need electronics, which come with warranties. And you need clothing, which has sizes. One option is to copy the product code 3 times and modify each version. That works until the day you need to change something. Maybe the tax logic changes. Maybe you add a new field. Now you have to update multiple places and hope you don't miss one. And if you do miss one, congratulations, you've just created a bug. This is the problem inheritance was designed to solve. Instead of duplicating common code, you define it once in a parent class and let other classes build on top of it. A book can inherit everything a product already has, its name, its price, and its existing behavior, while adding things that are unique to books, like an ISBN. And if books need special tax rules, they can replace the default tax calculation with their own version. The key idea here is the phrase is a. A book is a product. An electronic device is a product. A shirt is a product. When that relationship feels natural and stable, inheritance can be a great fit. But inheritance comes with a cost. It creates tight coupling between the parent and its children. When you change the parent class, every child can be affected. And the deeper the hierarchy gets, the riskier those changes become. A small change near the top can unexpectedly break something several levels below. This is sometimes called the fragile base class problem. That's why experienced developers usually keep inheritance shallow. 1 level is often enough. 2 levels can still be manageable. But if your class hierarchy starts looking like a royal family tree, that's usually a warning sign. And as we'll see next, there's often a better alternative. And that brings us to the 4th pillar, polymorphism. Imagine you have a universal remote. Point it at a TV and press play. The TV starts playing video. Point it at a speaker and press the same button. The speaker starts playing music. Same command, different behavior. That's the essence of polymorphism. In software, imagine a payment system. The code simply asks a payment method to charge a customer. It doesn't care whether that payment method is a credit card, PayPal, or a Bitcoin wallet. Each one handles the payment in its own way. A credit card might talk to Stripe, PayPal might call PayPal's API, a crypto wallet might interact with a blockchain service. The calling code doesn't need to know any of that. And that's what makes polymorphism so powerful. Suppose your company decides to support Apple Pay tomorrow. You don't have to rewrite the existing payment flow. You simply create a new payment method that follows the same contract and plug it in. The rest of the system continues to work exactly as before. The code cares about what an object can do, not how it does it. That's one of the key ideas behind extensible software. Now, polymorphism usually shows up in two forms. The first is overriding. That's when a child class replaces a method inherited from its parent with its own version. The method has the same name and the same inputs, but different behavior. Which version gets executed is decided while the program is running. The second is overloading. That's when multiple methods share the same name but accept different inputs. The program decides which version to use based on the arguments provided. A simple way to remember the difference is this. Overloading is about offering different options. Overriding is about specialization. One gives you multiple ways to use a method. The other lets different objects respond to the same request in their own way. At this point, we've covered the four pillars, but there are a few more ideas that complete the picture. Let's start with interfaces. An interface is basically a contract. It says, if you want to be treated as this type of thing, you need to provide these capabilities. It doesn't contain the implementation. It only defines what must exist. Think of it like a professional certification. The certification doesn't care where you learned the skill or how you learned it. It only cares that you can do the job. In the same way, a payment system doesn't need to know whether it's working with a credit card, PayPal, or crypto. As long as each one follows the same contract, the rest of the code can work with any of them. Abstract classes are a little different. Instead of being a pure contract, they're more like a partially completed blueprint. They can provide some working functionality while leaving certain pieces for child classes to implement themselves. Imagine a shape class. Every shape might move in the same way so that logic can be shared, but drawing a shape is different. A circle draws itself differently from a rectangle, so each one provides its own implementation. A simple way to remember the difference is that interfaces answer the question, what can you do? While abstract classes answer the question, what are you? One defines capabilities, the other provides a shared foundation. Now let's talk about a design choice that often separates beginners from experienced developers: composition versus inheritance. When people first learn object-oriented programming, inheritance often feels like the obvious solution. But in real projects, developers tend to use it more carefully. Imagine you're building a flying car. At first, inheritance seems natural. A flying car is a car, but it also needs the ability to fly. As systems grow, these inheritance hierarchies can become deep, fragile, and difficult to maintain. Composition approaches the problem differently. Instead of asking what an object is, it asks what an object has. A flying car has a driving system and has a flight system. Those behaviors come from separate components that can be added, removed, or replaced independently. This approach is especially popular in game development. Rather than building huge class hierarchies, developers assemble objects from components. An entity might have a position component, a rendering component, and a physics component. Want it to fly? Add a flight component. Want to remove that ability? Remove the component. The structure stays clean and flexible. And that's why one of the most common design principles is to favor composition over inheritance. Inheritance works best when there's a clear and stable is-a relationship. For most other situations, composition usually leads to code that's easier to extend, maintain, and reason about. Before we wrap up, let's clear up a few common misconceptions. One of the biggest is the idea that everything should be a class. It shouldn't. If all you're doing is converting Celsius to Fahrenheit, creating a temperature converter class is probably overkill. Sometimes a simple function is exactly what the problem needs. Another misconception is that deeper inheritance hierarchies mean better design. In reality, the opposite is often true. Every additional level creates more coupling between classes and makes the system harder to reason about. If your inheritance tree starts stretching 5 levels deep, that's usually a sign that it's time to rethink the design. You'll also hear people talk as if object-oriented programming and functional programming are competing philosophies and you have to pick a side. In practice, most modern languages use ideas from both. Objects are great for managing state and modeling entities. Functions are often great for transforming data. Good developers use whichever approach fits the problem instead of treating programming paradigms like sports teams. And that brings us to an important question. When should you actually use object-oriented programming? It works particularly well when you're modeling complex domains with lots of interacting entities, things like users, orders, accounts, or transactions. It's also valuable when multiple developers are working on the same system and need clear boundaries between different parts of the codebase. And when a project is expected to evolve over months or years, the structure it provides can make that growth much easier to manage. On the other hand, not every problem needs it. If you're writing a short script, creating classes for everything may just add unnecessary complexity. If your program is mostly transforming data from one form to another, a functional approach is often simpler and easier to follow. And if you're working in a language that wasn't designed around classes, forcing an object-oriented design can end up fighting the language instead of working with it. Ultimately, the mark of an experienced developer isn't knowing how to use object-oriented programming. It's knowing when it helps, when it doesn't, and having the judgment to choose the right tool for the job. Let's bring everything together with one example. Imagine you're building a notification system where users can receive alerts through email, SMS, push notifications, or Slack. At the foundation, you define a notifiable interface. It simply says, any notification channel must be able to send a message. It doesn't care how that happens, it only defines the contract. Then you create a base notifier abstract class. This class handles things every notifier has in common, like logging and retry logic, but it leaves the actual message delivery to the child classes. Email notifications, SMS notifications, and Slack notifications all build on that foundation and provide their own way of sending messages. That's inheritance in action, along with method overriding. Now here's where polymorphism comes in. The rest of the system doesn't need separate logic for email, SMS, or Slack. It simply asks the notifier to send a message. Each notifier responds in its own way, but the calling code stays exactly the same. Inside those notifier classes, things like API keys remain private, while the methods used by the rest of the system stay public. That's encapsulation. And the caller doesn't need to know whether an email is sent through SMTP, SendGrid, or something else entirely. That complexity is hidden away through abstraction. What about the user? Does a user inherit notification channels? Not really. A user has notification channels. That's composition. If you decide to support Slack tomorrow, you simply add another channel. You don't redesign a class hierarchy. And when a user object is created, a constructor can initialize things like the user's name, preferences, and default notification settings. Notice what's happening here. None of these concepts exist in isolation. Each one solves a different problem. But together, they help you build systems that are organized, flexible, and easier to maintain as they grow. Now think back to that interview question. Explain the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming. At this point, you can do a lot more than recite a list of definitions. You can explain why each one exists. Encapsulation protects objects from uncontrolled changes. Abstraction keeps complexity from leaking into the rest of the system. Inheritance helps eliminate duplication, although overusing it can create fragile designs. And polymorphism allows systems to grow by adding new behavior instead of rewriting existing code. And what about that follow-up question? When is inheritance the wrong choice? Now you know the answer. It's the wrong choice when the relationship isn't a clear and stable is a relationship. It's the wrong choice when you're trying to mix behaviors together. And it's the wrong choice when composition gives you a simpler and more flexible design. That's the difference between memorizing object-oriented programming and actually understanding it. One helps you answer the interview question. The other helps you design the system behind the interview question. If you found this useful, consider subscribing. I'm building a library of explanations focused on intuition and real understanding, not just definitions. And if there's another topic you'd like me to break down, let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.